Hi, Habit Nest family. We have here today James Clear. He's an author of an upcoming book called Atomic Habits, and I'm so excited to have him on the call today. Such a similar mission with Habit Nest and taking some of the fluff out of self-help and making things more actionable. He brings such a science-based approach to things, and from reading the beginning of his book, it looks incredible. So I'm so excited to jump into things. Have a few questions. James, you want to introduce yourself and kind of give a bit of backstory?
Sure, yeah. So thanks so much for having me on. Happy to chat. And I've been writing about habits for the last 5 years now, 5 or 6 years. So I launched jamesclear.com in November of 2012 and decided I was going to write an article every Monday and Thursday. And that writing habit, I stuck to that for the first 3 years. And that's kind of the thing that put me on the map, so to speak, and kind of got the business going and got my career as a writer going. Eventually, thanks to that writing habit and writing about habits week in and week out, I developed a fair amount of ideas under the topic and was approached by Penguin Random House to write a book. And that ended up becoming Atomic Habits, which as you mentioned, is coming out October 16th. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be able to share all of the ideas that I've come across over the years under one cohesive framework. Because previously I had written about them in, an article here, an article there. And when you have ideas on a blog, they can be linked together, but it's kind of like a spider web. And you don't really know how they all fit. It's not like a book has to be written like a number line, chapter 1, 2, 3, so on. And so by creating the book, I was really forced to figure out these aren't just disparate strategies and like you don't really know where to apply them. I had to figure out what is the framework that kind of underpins all of this and how can we line everything up so that you create a system that works together rather than just individual ideas that kind of fall flat on their own.
Absolutely. Like one of the things just from starting to read your book that I loved is exactly what you said, which is like it starts to incorporate a sort of system where it makes it really, really hard to mess up or fall off track because it just covers, every point of the way, what you should be putting your attention to. And if something seems to be going wrong, there's a reason for it. Just my initial thoughts, like I think there's such a good point of where to put your attention through there. So I want to say
thank you. Yeah. I appreciate that. That's kind of like one of my central core philosophies is that we do not rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. And so often when we think about change, we get amped up and think about what we want to achieve. And that's great to have some kind of dream or ambition. But it's really the system that you follow day in and day out that determines the results and the outcome that will ultimately occur. And so I've noticed just in my own life, I was very goal-oriented for a long time. And whether I set a goal or not had relatively little to do with whether I achieved it. It was much more about the system I was following. And so that philosophy has shaped in a lot of ways what the book became and how I try to approach behavior change and achievement now.
So could you tell people a little bit more about the model that you bring up in your book?
Yeah, so there are a variety of models for human behavior. As I researched the book, I actually put together a spreadsheet of as many as I could find, and there's well over 100 that have been put together by psychologists and researchers and scientists over the last probably 120 years or so, 125 years. So there are a lot of ways of thinking about human behavior. One of the more popular ones recently is the cue routine reward model that Charles Duhigg laid out in Power of Habit. This is sort of a rewording of B.F. Skinner's work, which was originally phrased as stimulus response reward, which is basically the same 3 steps. And that model of behavioral psychology and positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement is very effective and works in a lot of circumstances. But as I researched habits and behavior change more, there were a couple issues that came up. So the first is, like, why would someone perform a habit the very first time they do it? Why would someone smoke a cigarette for the first time or eat a cookie for the first time or, do any habit the initial time? This model, the 3-step model, cue, routine, reward, says like you see a cue and then you respond automatically. Well, the first time there really is no cue. Like you haven't internalized anything. You haven't learned anything. And so it became clear to me that there had to be some kind of motivational force that preceded a behavior, not only the first time, and then also that model, it struggles to explain why we respond differently to the same cue. So for example, you may walk into a kitchen and see a plate of cookies, and that's a cue. And then you eat the cookie, that's the routine, and then it tastes good and you enjoy it, so that's the reward. But you could walk into that same kitchen and see the same plate of cookies after having eaten a meal, for example, and you just ate like 5 cookies in the other room, and you see a plate now and you're like, oh man, I'm full, I don't want to eat it all. So same cue, but entirely different response. And the point that I'm getting to here is that ultimately I decided that there had to be a step in the system that accounts for our prediction or our expectation, why we make the choice that we do. And so that is a step that I call craving, which really is the expectation or the prediction that you have that precedes a response. So my 4-step model that I lay out in the book for all habits, and really I think it probably applies to most human behaviors, even if they aren't habitual, is cue, craving, response, reward. So something gets your attention, that's the cue. You make a prediction about how to respond, or you have some kind of expectation of what to do next. That's the craving. You take a response, which is the routine or the habit itself, and then you get some kind of benefit, which is the reward. Or if it's a punishment, then you have a reason to not repeat that behavior in the future. And so those 4 stages of cue, craving, response, and reward, I think, make up what I call the habit loop, or the updated habit loop, I guess.
Yeah, and I love your growth on Charles Duhigg's work. It's that's such a good cornerstone of exactly what we started talking about.
Yeah, I think Duhigg did a great job, and I don't think the model is inaccurate, just incomplete. And so I wanted to put together a model that I felt like was a little more comprehensive.
So something that I'm really curious about, I know that at the end of the day, we are all beings of emotion, and emotion really drives so much of what we do, right? I think something great about your model, Duhigg's model, a lot of these different works it brings, logically, it helps clear up kind of where to go from point A to B to C to D and loop it, right? So, I'm sure you've worked with people, or even with using yourself as an example, what do you do when you really, really don't feel like staying consistent with something, or, breaking a habit that you have? What's your process then? Are you able to really logically use this model to help guide you? Do you use another sort of internal mindset? I'm so curious about that, because it's something I struggle with too, and I think so many of us do.
Yeah, sure. So I'll give 2 answers. So the first answer is just kind of what do I find myself doing when I wake up and I feel like I'm in a funk? Or what do I do if I wake up and I feel like I don't feel motivated to get something done? And I have that happen just like everybody else, quite frequently, more often than I would like. And one thing that I've noticed that helps reset me a little bit, there are really 2 things. The first is doing something different. So usually I'm annoyed with the fact that I'm not writing an article. And so rather than beat my head against the wall and try to write the article, I just need to get some momentum going. I need to get something in a positive direction. So maybe that's walking for 5 minutes. Maybe it's reading 1 page. Maybe it's meditating for a minute. Maybe it's doing 10 push-ups. Something not related to writing, but anything that's positive. It could just be making your bed. I mean, this is one reason why I make my bed and brush my teeth and floss my teeth and do all the same routine every morning. Because within the first 5 minutes, I at least have a couple, they're minor, but little things that are moving me in a positive direction. I want the energy to start flowing forward. And then once I get a little bit of that wave going, then I can ride that into the next task that I've been putting off. The second thing, though, and this applies to the model that I just laid out. So cue, craving, response, reward. That's this kind of updated habit loop that I've laid out. Yeah. Well, out of those 4 stages, we can create what I call the 4 laws of behavior change. This is something I lay out in the book. Make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, make it satisfying. So cue, you want to make it obvious so it catches your attention easily. The craving, you want to make the habit as attractive as possible so that you're interested in doing it. The routine or the behavior itself, you want to make it as easy as possible so that it's frictionless. And then the reward, you want to make it, or the ending of the habit, you want to make it satisfying, so you have a reason to repeat it in the future. So you just asked, do I actually use this model to, to improve the habits I have? And the answer is yes. So one example of this is flossing. So for many years, I've always been in the habit of brushing my teeth when I wake up and when I go to bed. But for many years, I never flossed my teeth. And eventually I stepped back after I had worked a little bit on habits and read about it and written about it for a couple of years and thought about, why is this? And so I just laid out those 4 laws, and each one can be seen sort of like a lever for behavior change. And you don't need, for any given circumstance, you don't have to do all 4 things, but is going to be 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 of those levers that seems like a good one to pull. So for flossing, I looked at the situation. I was like, well, why am I not flossing? What do I typically do? And I just started to map out the pain points associated with the behavior. So first one is, I would often forget to do it because the floss was in the drawer in the bathroom. I just wouldn't see it. So I needed to make it obvious. So that's like the first law, the first lever. So I bought a little bowl and put it right next to my toothbrush. And then the second thing I realized was that I didn't like doing it because it was kind of a hassle to like pull the floss out and wrap it around my finger, and I didn't really like how it felt, whatever. So I bought a couple of those pre-made flossers that are like picks, and I put those in the bowl. So now it's easier and more satisfying. So that's kind of law 3 and law 4. So by doing those 3 things, suddenly it became much easier for me to stick with the habit. And now I do it without thinking. Now I do it twice a day, which my wife thinks is kind of unnecessary. But the point being that you don't have to do all 4 every single time, but you will notice that there are a couple points of friction with whatever the habit is you're working on. And based on the system that I laid out, you can just kind of try to approach those bottlenecks in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I love that approach of like experimentation too, because at the end of the day, there's always a reason for why something is failing, right? And if you're able to just remove all of that emotional, not pain, but just interference of like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I'm not good at self-help or habits or growing as a person. Like, that is such a big barrier. And once you're kind of able to move that aside and boil it down to those different elements in the equation, which is based on like the different points of your model or, what you're able to just point things to, it makes it so easy to improve and be like, okay, let me test this out. Exactly like what you said.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think self-experimentation or a philosophy of self-experimentation kind of underpins everything that we talk about because, or that we're talking about here, that I write about in the book. If you're not willing to experiment, nobody, it's impossible for me to write a book that perfectly predicts what your circumstance is going to be. And secondly, even if I did know exactly what your circumstance is today, circumstances change. Your environment changes, your life changes, your goals change. And as you go through life and things shift, you have to be willing to experiment, to try new things out and see what the solution should be currently. And if you're not willing to embrace that, and you think that you have to get it all right from the beginning, then it's very hard to stick with something for the long run. I talk about that a little bit more in the second half of the book, about this idea that you need to put in your reps in practice rather than theorize about perfection. And I think it's an important point that you brought up.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm curious, like once you kind of figured out this model and had it serve as a big part of your life, like how have things gone for you in terms of habit building? Like, are there any long-term habits that have been really difficult for you to deal with, whether that's breaking something or building something, or has it like really been like smooth sailing once this has been clear for you? I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So I think that the good news for me is that some of what I consider some of the big pillar habits, like working out and writing and having your finances under control and saving consistently, like I put a lot of energy into optimizing those areas. And because of that, I feel like I'm in a pretty good position. But I definitely have habits that I've just, for whatever reason, have struggled to change. And the most obvious one is waking up early. And I think about this one a fair amount because I I don't know that I experience enough pain associated with it. Like, I don't know that it hinders my life enough for me to try to change it. So what I mean by that is I have this cardinal rule where I don't cheat myself on sleep. So I get 8 or 9 hours every night, but I also really like the work I do and really want the book to be successful and for the website to grow and so on. So I have trouble shutting off at night. So I'll often find myself working at 10 or 11 or midnight. And if I'm working till midnight and I'm going to get at least 8 hours of sleep, well, then I'm not getting up till, 8:30. So I have had periods where I've gotten up at 6 or gotten up at 6:30. And I do really enjoy that period in the morning. I think that that's when my best energy is, right after I wake up, and that's when I get my best work done. But for whatever reason, I've not been able to master this power down ritual at the end of the night so that I can shut off at, say, 10 instead of midnight. And because of that, I often find myself working later and thus sleeping in later and so on. So that one has eluded me, and I wonder if it's just because I run my own business and I'm self-employed, I can do that every day, and it's not that much of a hindrance. We'll see. I'll be interested to see once if I have kids in a couple of years or something, I'll be interested to see how that impacts things and like how I adjust.
Yeah. I mean, I can totally empathize. So like a quick tidbit of backstory, like I used to sleep at like 3 or 4 a.m. every night because I'd be up playing video games and I'd wake up at like noon. And in college, I scheduled my classes to start at 1 p.m. because like I wouldn't be able to make it.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh my God. Like I think I come from like the extreme of no discipline, like I'm chaos at my core. And it's been so interesting to treat my whole life as an experiment of like, okay, I failed at this for like 4 years. Like, let me see what it's like. Dude, I grew up like 230 pounds. I was a big kid. Fattest kid in my middle school. It's been interesting, but I can really empathize with that because I have 2 co-founders as well, and they wake up like they're both early guys. One of them ridiculous wakes up at like 3:30, 4 a.m. like every day, like every like it's mind blowing to me. And I'm naturally more of a night owl, and just experimenting with that has been a whole world. But I love.
Well, the good news is someone's always working on the company then, because one of you, it's kind of like you guys have a team on the East Coast and the West Coast with your
James,
sleeping spots.
My biggest fear, and I've told my co-founders this, is I'm going to be working in the office when Ari, our super early guy, comes in. This is my biggest fear ever.
You're finishing up yesterday. He's starting tomorrow.
Yeah. But I was going to say, I love that you're able to share that and like be open with that, because I think we have, it's nice to serve that role of like just humanizing this whole piece.
I should say, I consider myself, I don't consider myself an expert, although I get branded as that when people talk about habits and behavior change, which is very nice. I'm glad people find my work useful and interesting. But I am a peer with my readers. We're on the same level. We're all experimenting and trying to put these ideas into practice. And I just share the lessons that I learned along the way. So there's certainly there's no way that I have it all figured out. I think as soon as you assume that you do have it figured out, you stop learning, which is the whole point of this to begin with. So even the model that I lay out in the book, I will continue to bulletproof and test that to see if I can improve it in some way, to see if it can be stress tested against real world experience. I'm very interested to see what readers have to say about everything, because I think that it's valid and highly useful. But I don't think it's perfect. And so I want to know like where can it be improved.
Yeah.